Thank you very much, Sarah. No problem. I'm just so happy to know that Sustainalytics is so famous already. So my name is Dana Sasarean, and I lead the mining research for Sustainalytics. And I'm talking to you from Ottawa, where spring is slowly coming in. For those of you unfamiliar with Sustainalytics, now we are a Morningstar company, and we are one of the largest providers of ESG, environmental, social, and governance research, ratings, and analytics. And that's primarily for institutional investors. We do have, our ratings are free on Yahoo Finance in case you are interested to check out some companies, just a high level. I think we have roughly 2,000 companies available there. But today I wanted to talk to you about community relations in mining. And this is obviously a big issue. And I wanted to structure it around how do we approach measuring community relations risk. I wanted to share with you briefly what the research tells us so far. And in the mining context, share with you some trends that I see in the industry. So as I mentioned, community relations, community risk, community impact, it's a very complex matter for mining companies because we are talking about overlapping dimensions. It's about access to workforce. It's about land rights, community rights to clean air, clean water. It's often about NGOs, not just communities, because ideas and expectations are kind of joint developments. It's also a material issue, and the materiality has two sides. On one hand, mining industries have a huge impact on communities, which in turn can affect businesses because oppositions and blockades and preventing can delay regulatory requirements, can, as I said, expand the timelines for new mines to be approved and developed. It can also increase the cost and occasionally can stop development in their tracks. So how do we kind of make heads and tails of these complexities? Because investors expect clear ways of measuring complex data sets and making them comparable across industries, across mining companies, for example. In very simple terms, we estimate a risk at company level. We evaluate the risk exposure. We assess a management, which translates into the proportion of risk that a company manage, and we calculate the difference, which we name it like unmanaged risk, or, in short, just community relations risk rating. And the way we look at this on the risk side, on an industry by industry basis, we go through, okay, what's the impact of this industry on the community? So as I mentioned, mining, especially open pit mining, has a huge environmental footprint. And again, this is the complexity because a lot of community issues are actually a result of poor environmental management. So we are talking about dust and traffic during construction. We are talking about impact on water availability and water quality once a mine starts producing, because mining uses large quantities of water in order to extract ore, metals from ore. We are talking about pressure for mining companies to provide employment, to manage their impact, and also contributes to a sustainable development. Also, when companies fail to meet expectations, to manage their impact, they are faced with oppositions and blockades and lawsuits that occasionally can drag on for years. As we've seen it with certain spills, like Brazil, everybody's familiar with iron ore spills in Brazil. First in 2015, then in 2019. So there are countries where mining communities have really jeopardized a social license to operate. So it's hard to trust them in a way, thinking that, okay, one disaster happened, you have not prevented the second disaster. So there's a story here, and there's a lot that companies can do. In some extreme cases, community relations opposition can lead to conflict. And then there's violence, there's clashes between protesters and security forces, and companies are often dragged into allegations of breaching human rights. And again, these things don't necessarily go away when companies move away. And that's the case for Hotbay, for example. They did sell in 2011 a problematic mine, Escobal mine in Guatemala. However, the lawsuit, human rights lawsuit associated with that, which is one of the first accepted in Canada, it's still ongoing. Another examples of huge projects that have been stalled due to their significant environmental impact on glaciers and water is Barrick's gold mine in the Chilean part of Pascua-Lama. So these are just some examples to, again, show how these things are material. However, when we think about management, it's not all bad news. So this is where I've seen companies evolve throughout the years. In our approach, we follow three main pillars. We look for policies, we look for programs, because we think it's more important to how companies implement into practice the policies and commitments. And finally, we look for performance. On the policy side, it's not just a yes and no exercise. For example, our main categories are human rights and indigenous people rights. And as I said, it's a very detailed process for really understanding at what extent companies commit to things that are specific and relevant. For example, we look for free prior informed consent, the FPIC, if companies commit to communicating to communities before development starts for mining projects. Programs and implementation, we look at three main things. It's human rights and community development and community engagement. And this last one is the one where I've seen companies improve the most. I think this is where companies are reviewing the way they approach things in the past and looking for new ways of addressing this throughout the life mine cycle. So it's about, first boots on the ground. It's about the stages where the construction is happening and then production, but also post-closure. So this thing, instead of being just a philanthropic exercise for contributing to the community, it's more engaging early on, collaborating with the communities and give them a voice in decision-making, business decision-making that impacts communities, essentially. So what do we actually see so far? So here I wanted to quickly maybe just share one slide. And maybe Sarah, if you can confirm that this shows okay.
Yep, it looks beautiful.
All right, so as I explained, it's all about measuring, evaluating risk, measuring management, and calculating a difference. So we are looking at these bars represent companies. The yellow bar is the risk exposure. As I mentioned, the mining industry is one of the highest risk exposure for communities risk, both in terms of impact and materiality for the business, for new mines or existing mines alike. The green bars represent the management that companies have. So we assess how strong the management is, and that translates into a proportion of risk management. And the little dots, the markers, represent the community risk rating. And just to make it clear, this is just one aspect of the overall ESG risk rating. For mining, we have up to 10 such material ESG issues. So as you can see, we are looking here at precious metal companies. They're lined up, according to the risk level and also grouped. So you can see this arrow at bottoms. So to the left, we have the severe and high risk companies. The furthest left, for example, is Zijin. So this company, has huge risk. They are present in some of the highest risk geographies like Eritrea, Peru, Papua New Guinea. However, when it comes to management, they lack even the most fundamental disclosure around what are their practices and policies and how are they managing this issue. So in this bucket, if you want, we tend to have companies that are exposed to high level of risk. The risk has often materialize in controversies and that we assess as either significant or severe, while disclosure is actually quite poor. One exception here is Barrick, which is in this group is one company with a high risk, but also the highest management. So this kind of proves it's not just about disclosure. So Barrick has fantastic disclosure. They have very detailed and comprehensive policies and management practices. However, when it comes to deliverable, to the result, we still see there's a lot of risk that's not covered. This is not to say that the company is not making steps and things are not improving, but as it is, we still see quite a bit of risk that's unmanaged. At the opposite end, on the right-hand side, we have the companies that, of course, they still face risk. And we acknowledge the fact that beyond the background risk, there's always a residual portion of this risk. So it doesn't matter how great the management is, there's a chance that community will oppose mining because of its impact. So, however, at this end, we see companies that have far better management, more open to talk about their challenges and how are they managing. For example, the furthest right, one of the precious mining companies with the lowest risk in the set is Newcrest. So I guess the crux, and one thing that we look at both risk exposure and management are controversies. As I mentioned, we assess them from low level, just an opposition here or there, to more significant or severe, where we see blockades, legal challenges, lawsuits, and violence, human rights breaches. And overall, pressures with diversified combined, we find that 60% of them have severe to serious controversies. 60% of the companies do have controversies, and half of that, roughly 30%, are quite severe. So I think I'm getting close to the time. So really what I wanted you to take away is how do we approach assessing community risk exposure and management? What does the research tell us? And looking at this, we see there's quite a gap. And in the context of global crises like COVID and climate change and water shortages in particular, we see this pressure increasing for companies, not only in emerging markets, but in developed markets as well. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. That was absolutely brilliant, Dana. And leave the slide on for a second, if you will, because I know there's a question about that. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Put your hands together for fantastic Dana. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I know that there are a number of questions coming in. Just to make sure that we don't misinterpret this, could you just take us through again, what is the difference between your managed risk and your unmanaged risk? Is your managed risk what the company is actually doing to manage risk, or is it their potential to be able to manage the risk? What is meant by that?
Well, obviously there is no clear, this is not a science, but the risk exposure, it's evaluated separately. So we say, exposure is 14 position, and it starts from looking at what's the industry background risk compounded with what the company specifically risk exposure is due to operations, due to controversies. Now the green bar is separately measuring our management indicators. And we think, okay, for community risk, these are the management indicators that we think are relevant. And as I mentioned, it's about human rights policies, it's about human rights programs, it's about indigenous rights policies, and communities involvement and community engagement programs. And those are very detailed. I would say overall, we look at probably roughly 50, 60 indicators to measure management. And again, controversies are looked at as a failed management. So if a company has a great management, we reduce the amount of that management that kind of reflects those controversies. So basically, we'll say a company has 100 score, stellar management. That would mean that the yellow bar would be equal to the green one. However, if there are controversies, that green bar goes down, basically.
Okay, and then the blue dots, what do they?
The blue dot, it's really just a mathematical, like it's yellow minus green. So it's risk exposure minus management.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for that, because I know that we've got a number of people who live in the world of risk management and ESG, so they'll be very keen to understand the interpretation of that, because obviously that term managed risk means different things to different companies, so it's always good to ask that question. So with this, Dana, how do you then validate this information? So I mean, so number one, where are you getting the information from? And then how are you checking that information is correct?
So there are different moving parts, as you can expect. We have a standalone platform for monitoring controversies. So we have close to 700,000 media sources. So we have a team that goes through all this news, and when we find news that matches our company's name, they become controversy elements. And we have far more companies that we cover on the controversy side. But on the comprehensive ESG risk rating, we have a lower level because it's more comprehensive. We look for publicly available information primarily, so whatever we can find. And once our research is complete, we renew this annually. We send it to the company for feedback. So companies always have a chance to actually look for, oh, we think this is not correct, or provide additional information.
And do you use any other data sources? So kind of other than what's sort of out there on the internet, do you go and use things like, so where there are, satellite data sets? I know I keep going back to satellite data sets, and everyone will find out why on Friday. But do you go and use things like that? Or is it something that you're using knowledge and information that is already in the public domain?
So we are primarily about the public domain. Obviously, we are exploring asset location for various other components, and with climate risk, for example, increasing and understanding where things are, it's important. We, like everybody else, I think we use machine learning and some predictive models. So we, the first step in starting research, you let the machine do all the sweeping, and a lot of things are already highlighted as we start going through. So we have analysts actually reviewing these things and vetoing it. And we also have quite a bit of write-up to explain where a company is and why. And this is quite unique, I think, for Sustainalytics on the controversy side, because we explain like where things are and what needs to happen for things to go either up or down, and also evaluate the management. So it's providing like different angles for different approaches to create a bit of space for companies to actually improve.
Great, that's fantastic. And in terms of the criteria with regards to community relations, do you use the same criteria across all sectors? Or is it something where you've got something that's specific to mining or different things? It's the same criteria, is it?
We use them across all sectors, depending on an issue. For example, on environmental assessment pillar, we have items that are mining specific. So we have two that assess tailings management and tailings standards. But for this community relations in particular, this is the same across all actually we have this for 14 industries out of 42 as a key issue.
Cool, excellent.
What will differ though, it's the different weights for different components, just to make that clear, so that there's also like a weight element.
So this is something, and I suspect you've really already answered this question, but of course there are other organizations that do ESG risk ratings, etc. And of course there have been some recent studies that have shown actually there is a massive diversity in where each organization perhaps rates different companies. And of course, this is becoming more and more important because actually a company's ESG rating or scoring is actually beginning to have more financial impact potentially on that company. Are there any specific reasons as to why there's such discrepancy, shall we say, in terms of those ESG ratings between the different agencies, such as Sustainalytics versus some of the others?
Well, I guess at some level, you can argue that the publicly available information is the same for everyone. However, when it comes to methodologies, each methodology is slightly different. And I don't think there's about getting it right or wrong. It's a lot like mainstream analysts have different ways of assessing the same thing as well. I think it's about finding your strength and kind of improving those. And for us, for example, I think the strength was always on management and the detail and very transparent way of showing what we analyze and how we score that. I think it's probably even beneficial to have various ways to even look at risk. So providing we have a lot of clients that buy research from multiple sources and kind of cross-reference and cross-check because there are strengths and opportunities for each approach.
And so final question, apologies for all of this, but people have just found it really exciting. When you're talking about risk, are you just talking about threat or are you also including opportunity?
The opportunity side, it's mostly just at the extent of which is incorporated in our management. So for example, one of our management indicators looks at, is the company setting certain targets for community development and monitoring how these contributions play out. So it's not about just handing out money. It's about, oh, we really want to reduce poverty, or we really want to increase the number of girls that are educated. So those are the opportunity sides. We don't have anything yet to kind of, actually, there's a beta overlay. So as I said, on a company by company basis, we have a committee that can review a reduction of risk if we see a huge upside potential in certain cases. We haven't seen it much for community relations yet. As I said, we just reward good practices. Like, for example, I like out of Augusta's approach to collaborative tailing. So they are, collaborating with other companies and the government to build a better and more solid tailing safety database to protect communities. So things like that.
Brilliant. So with that, Dana, there are some more questions in the Q&A for you, but I'm going to bring this to a close because I know we need to go across to Epi, but thank you so much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the wonderful Dana.